Hi, Anderson Brown here. I'm going to do a little metaphysics today. Today, I want to talk about the metaphysical debate, an ancient one that many people hear about in intro class: free will versus determinism. Free will versus determinism. Of course, that discussion also bound up with our notions about personal responsibility. That's part of why the discussion between the free will people, the libertarians, and the determinists is interesting. Uh, now, I'm not going to take a side on that today, though. Let me set up my screen here. Oh my, yeah, okay, here we go. Cartesian roots of the free will versus determinism debate. That is, I've been thinking about this for a while, and I went to make this video. It seems to me that the free will determinism debate is kind of a pseudo problem. As anyone who looks at me much knows that I'm sort of an empiricist view, but I really at this point think that both the libertarians and the determinists are making the same kind of mistake. I say they're ancient dualist intuitions in plain sight. It does seem to me that really what's going on with the free will determinism debate is a consequence of confusion about the relationship between the mind and the body. And so that's going to be my thesis today. Let me get on with that. Let me explain what I mean then by Cartesian mind-body dualism. Again, I'm not assuming that anybody has any real sophisticated idea of these things, trying to make this as plain as possible. So let me go over it then. There's a lot of words on this one. Although most people of a broadly secular cast today think of themselves as naturalists, let's say, someone who thinks the best physical science is likely the best guide to what there is. Trying to, again, make that real simple, make the notion of naturalism relatable there. Basically a non-dualist. In fact, I think that the real issue around a lot of the discussion we call naturalism is really about monism versus dualism, rather than the adjectives naturalism or materialism and so on. Anyway, so let's say someone thinks the best physical science is likely the best guide to what there is. Don't do ghosts and goblins, don't do angels and demons, just your thoroughly modern natural science kind of person. A lot of people will say that about themselves, and sincerely enough, but there are old conceptions about the mind as something distinct from the body. Even, for example, in the very widespread notion of a representational theory of mind, that what we experience is some sort of mental representation rather than having direct interaction with reality. Uh, that is an ancient Cartesian notion that many people who would describe themselves as naturalists in the modern secular mode nonetheless would still unreflectively subscribe to. So, all right. Old conception is something distinct from the body, and this is what we call Cartesian. When I say Cartesian, I mean mind-body dualist, and then also with the implication that you've got sort of a passive representational kind of picture of the relationship between this disembodied soul, right, through its body with the rest of the world on classical Cartesian thinking. So, and as I say, Descartes himself is a really interesting person. He, in fact, in his optics explicitly says he doesn't think that there are other little pictures inside the mind. So, all of this with due respect to some of these philosophers in this tradition, like Descartes, or I might mention Kant, who are excellent philosophers worthy of a lot of study. All right, second bullet point. In this video, I'm talking about the free will versus determinism debate. But as I said, any number of discussions in metaphysics and philosophy of mind, I think, still can be made to turn on this excavating about Cartesian intuitions, mind-body dualist thinking that's still very much around. So the last bullet point, my thesis here is that the free will determinism problem is a pseudo problem. I'm basically empiricist. I'm going to talk about what that word compatibilism means further, so I won't linger on that here. But a compatibilist roughly is someone who thinks that there's sort of middle way through this. And many empiricists have taken what is, I'm going to explain that in a second. I'm not sure, though, that compatibilism is the right word for my position, since I don't think that either determinism or libertarianism are coherent positions at all. So I'm not sure that saying that I think both of them are incoherent positions is exactly compatibilism. I think there's one source of misunderstanding, that all the people involved in the debate are actually making essentially the same mistake about the relationship between the mind and the body. So let's talk about determinism. Determinism important here because there's some current discussion that maybe we don't realize how much determinism obtains, so we have false ideas about responsibility. I think that's a mistake. But in any event, let me go over this. Determinism view that everything that happens from causal necessity, such that it could not have happened otherwise. Really, and this is not the same thing as the problem of fate, right? If God knows about what's going to happen in the future and so on. This is determinism. It's about physical causation. It's something that comes up in the early modern period, a view that comes up in the early modern period with Newtonian mechanics. And again, the idea is quite simple here. I mean, the idea is that if you think that you live in a physical universe of physical events, and these events are lawful, that is, every effect has a cause, and there are these cause-effect relations which are lawful, which are exceptionless. And if you just think that, if you just take very literally that idea that everything has a cause and the relationship between the causes and the effects are lawful, then right there you can motivate determinism. It's one problem that to see right there is that the world is given to you as the way that it is. Now you can use something like a theory about causation to say the world's not as it appears, but it seems really that what we have with the theory of causation is coming some sort of better understanding of the world than what we have now. I don't think say behaviorism doesn't turn you into a zombie, for example. I mean, I think people are very sort of over literal about the implications of these arguments. On that first bullet point there, I say, again, motivated by a view of physical causation as law-like, simple as that. But then I say it's not strictly in the spirit of empiricist epistemology. Let me just explain that in the interest of just doing some philosophy here today. So David Hume, for example, we get the classic empiricist picture here that you are habituated to have expectations about the future based on regularities of your past experience. And so that's sort of the psychology. It's a learning model of psychology. It's classical empiricism. The thing about that, though, is, again, just as a point of philosophical interest, as Hume pointed out, you really don't know that the next experience you're going to have is really going to be uniform with all of the past experiences. That is, as with everything else, and as Hume is constantly pointing out, we do not have any kind of logical proof or logical demonstration that the future is going to be similar to the past. So, it's something that's perhaps mostly of interest to philosophers, but strictly speaking, when we talk about laws in empiricist philosophy of science or empiricist psychology, we're talking about habituation. We're talking about habituations and expectations. It's a treatise of human nature. Remember what David did. So, okay, that's one point. Second bullet point. Be that as it may, all right, so we've got this idea that, say, just if you decide, the idea here is if you're a naturalist, what that means, among other things, supposedly, right, is that you think that there are law-like relations between all causes and effects. Everything has a cause, and those causes are lawful, and that's it. So that's why you think that everything's determined. And I explained that, there's a little wrinkle in that with Hume, but then let's go on to the second bullet point. Be that as it may, in order to motivate philosophical determinism, you have to assume something more than just that everything has a cause. You have to assume that our experience of making choices when it appears we could act otherwise is illusory. Okay, it's not, it doesn't actually necessarily follow from the idea that everything has a cause that you don't have choices. We could understand physical causation to be nomological, to be lawful, to be exceptionalist, and not make this further move of asserting that choice is an illusion. It's an odd thing to assert that choice is an illusion. But in any event, the bare fact that we think that we live in a causal universe where everything comes under some kind of set, as Leibniz would say, of sufficient reason, that there's some kind of causal explanation that's sufficient to explain everything, doesn't, determinism doesn't follow from that. That is specifically determinism, and it's the second line of it that says that I think I'm making choices, but I'm not really. Last bullet point. This is sort of my basic take on determinism these days. I'm going to elaborate this in the next slide. Determinism is a kind of skepticism. What is skepticism? Again, remember, I already mentioned you've got this Cartesian notion that what you're really experiencing is a representation of the world, some kind of mental representation that's a product of your own mind, rather than having any kind of direct knowledge of the world itself. So once you've got that representational picture of the world, skepticism is very much baked in there, because you've always got that question then about the correspondence relation between your mental representation and the external world. Now, and then that's what brings skepticism. Skepticism is baked into the representational theory of mind. And determinism is a kind of skepticism. Like all the others, it comes from this representational theory of mind. Philosophical skepticism, when the skeptic tells us we don't know something, we're absolutely certain that we do know. Descartes motivates it by saying you have to have a logical proof of the certainty of the proposition. And as Hume points out, we really don't have that for pretty much any of our habituation results. So again, just to define philosophical skepticism, the skeptic tells us we don't know something. We're absolutely certain, but we do know. That's what makes it philosophical. That is, for example, that really the way to put it is the skeptic is saying you can't prove, right? And that, which also reveals the mechanism, right? Because it's a rationalist argument. You don't have a logical proof of the logical necessity of something, right? That's really what's going on. You can't prove that you have a body. You can't prove that the external world exists. You can't prove that other minds. You can't prove that you're not dreaming right now, and so on. You can't prove that you're making choices. It's the same thing. It's another version of the same thing. Standard responses to skepticism apply to determinism. Once you see this, that determinism is a variant of skepticism, then if you have empiricist tools to address skepticism, and there are some, then that works in any variety of skepticism. So let's talk about that then. I want my last slide. I want to go to this one and then this one. So quickly then, responses to skeptical determinism. And these are just the standard responses to skepticism as such, right? If the skeptic tells me I don't know that the external world exists, this is the parlor game, this is the card trick. I can reply that existing is something that obtains for things in the context of the external world. Do you know where your car keys are? Do you know the way to our house? You know things or don't know things inside a certain framework, as for a philosopher like Kant would say, right? And that includes this notion of the external world. Whatever you make of it, I cannot coherently be said to know or not know about the existence of the external world. That's the right response to the skeptic. That is, there are criteria for use of the verb to know, right? Do I know where my car keys are? And notice there are utilities. That is, it only is, when I say coherent, right? You have reasons for wanting to know whether I know where my car keys are or not. I might know or I might not know. I might be incorrect. Okay, second bullet point. It's mistaken to say I know about my own thoughts and feelings in the same way. As in the case, again, the philosophical sort of meme or stereotype is that, well, we know about our own private experiences, but then the experiences of other people, thoughts and feelings of other people are opaque to us. There's a very sporting argument here that that's got things exactly wrong. Since after all, if I want to know how other people are thinking or feeling, I can sort of ask and look. It's mistaken to say, on the other hand, that I know about my own thoughts and feelings, as in the case of supposed knowledge of the existence of the external world. So again, what's the right answer? Not that I do know that the external world exists. No, that's not the right answer. The right answer is the external world is not it's a proper object of knowledge. It's just not a proper application of the verb to know. I don't know, nor do I not know it. as in the case of knowledge exists in the external world, the criteria for pragmatic use of the verb to know are not met here. There's no coherent distinction between simply having thoughts and feelings and knowing I have them. No utility for the verb, not picking anything out other than just the raw fact of experiencing the thoughts and feelings. Nothing else to add that's knowledge such as justified to say that I have them. So, and really this is, I think, the main point, the last bullet point on the slide here. The claim that deliberation and choice is not just that I chose in some moment, but also that I'm thinking about things all the time and what to do, right? Are illusions, that's the claim. This is just a version, an iteration, just another example of this larger claim that I don't, that maybe I just have a misleading representation of things. Maybe I don't know that the external world is real, or that I have a body, or that other minds exist, or that I'm making choices. It's all the same claim. And not only that, but my belief that I'm functioning in an environment full of solid, medium range size physical objects, and that I have a body and the time and space are real. Me making choices and deliberating, by the way, is built into all of that. You can't sort of say, oh, well, everything's real except choices. Choices are completely vascular with the reality of everything else. So this is just a really, really fundamentally incoherent notion but notice what it's based on. It's based on the idea that somehow the thing that's making choices isn't part of this physical causal order. But remember, we need to also account for, this wrong interpretation that's saying that it is part of the causal order entails determinism. But first, let's talk about freedom for a little bit. Again, libertarianism is the philosophical term here. It's not that political term, libertarianism. This is a term of art in metaphysics. The libertarian is a person who thinks that there is freedom, that is, there are agents who are not governed, I suppose, by the laws of the causal order. Libertarianism is a philosophical term for the view that the self can think and act in ways that are not compelled by anterior causes. Because after all, it's because there's this linear chain of nomological causation, right? That's the idea, that's what we're stuck in. At the ontological extreme, of course, you have theists and mystics, mind-body dualists, in which case, when I say that human choice is a miracle, again, miracle there is a pretty technical term. I'm using it exactly the same way that David Hume uses it in chapter 10 of the Inquiry Concerning Human Understanding. That is, it's just an exception to the laws of nature. Okay, you say there's a miracle when you say that there's an exception to these causal laws. Second bullet point, empiricism, Hume, the avatar of all of this, has traditionally been unimpressed by claims about non-physical entities and powers. Remember Hume on causation, he says, well, you've got your observations, you can't sort of speculate that there's anything more to reality than what it is that you're observing. It was Hobbes and Locke who really developed this compatibilist position. I do want to step out here just for a second and talk about compatibilism, because it really is an important thing. People tend to kind of overdo it when we're talking about freedom and determinism, because obviously freedom sounds like a very good thing. So that's what everybody always wants. Me too. I don't, I relate. But look, the idea is that it's my act, right? It's my act. And that means that the cause of the act is me. And that means that I have to have some concreticity. That is to say that the action is my action, is to say that it reflects things about me. I'm the cause of the action, myself. All of that entails necessarily that I have some concreticity, that there be some facts about me. You see, that's the paradox of freedom. There has to be a thing that's free, a person, a being that is the free thing, such that it's their reasons and their nature, right, that are the real explanations of these causal phenomena that they are, right? So compatibilism is that's the philosophically interesting point in traditional compatibilism, the kind that John Locke patiently explains to us, for example, which is that you have to be somebody, you have to be an agent, you have to have your reasons, you have to have your concreticity. That's the paradox of freedom. Only a concrete being that is distinct and has contingent properties and needs and so on, can be seen coherently to be a free thing. So that's what's meant by compatibilism in all this debate. So that's that second bullet point there. Then empiricism has been unimpressed by claims about non-physical entities and powers. So, okay, so, and then, okay, I mentioned Confucius there. Confucius is saying that the individual emerges from its relationship with the collective, and the collective is really the ground of the individual. So it's the same kind of idea. Last bullet point, then, again, you see this a lot. Everybody wants to overdo it. Say existentialists who say that the mind is a sort of non-being and a center of negation, but in which case there's no individuality, right? Everyone's just a center of negation. If Plato says real being is pure rationality again is it's the one, not the many. It's just universal. There's no individuality there. Similarly, if you're saying, well, there's quantum indeterminacy, or or some other way of saying that the causal order doesn't hold, that's not going to underwrite freedom. You want lots of causal order to underwrite freedom because you want real, concrete, well-defined beings. Those are the kinds of beings who could be agents. If a random event or an uncaused event, if my body has a spasm, for example, that's not my act. Okay, that's not an action of mine. So you're never going to get any account freedom from all that new agey stuff about quantum indeterminacy and so on. It's not going to work. So okay, some remarks on freedom. But here's the unifying illusion. Again, I'm saying that both the libertarian and the determinist are really both making the same mistake. And the mistake that they're making is the way they're conceiving the soul, or at least, even if they're not conceiving of it this way, the intuitions that they're still having about the relationship between the mind and the body. This is so all over the place in all this chatbot discussion that we're having. That's maybe driving me a little here. So the first bullet point, how to put this, the unifying illusion is the self-mind is somehow in the world, but not of it. The drill. It's Casper the Friendly Ghost. You have a body, but then you have the soul, and it's not really the same thing as your body. What are called the determinist and the libertarian positions both exist within this illusion. They're the same size of the same mistake. Either you think you're this Cartesian soul being carried off by, the mindless flow of nature, or you think you're this sort of Cartesian miracle that's cutting against the grain of the flow of nature, both making exactly the same mistake. The important thing to get is on the determinist side, you make the mistake. You want to be a naturalist, but determinism is in a naturalist position. Libertarianism, since it includes the contingent of magical dualists and all the rest, is one more likely to be rejected by the secular minded. Again, these early modern empiricists, God, transcendental properties like Platonic properties, probability. Hume was frozen out on modality. Notably souls, of course, just like gods and angels that are non-physical things. These things are just not in the ontology of modern empiricism. And so then freedom seemed to the early modern philosophers and to empiricist philosophers right along as just one of those, kind of an excess, like causation, according to Hume, kind of just sort of a bit of speculative metaphysics that doesn't really justify by anything that's being observed. So a lot of empiricists, again, even right up to our day, will say determinism, who cares? I mean, maybe but again, third bullet point is, I think, is the most important point we're discussing today. Determinism makes the same mistake. Well, in as much as it describes itself sort of carried along by the causal process, such that people aren't really responsible, right? Supposedly, I think I'm making decisions. I'm just naive. I'm not really making decisions. Notice, we can get a lot of stuff that about responsibility and justice that these people want. If we just think about accident of birth and stuff like that, we don't have to get metaphysical about it. If only we understood the causal disenfranchisement of the experiencing self, right? Like the guy stuck up in the head at the end of Being John Malkovich or something, right? Oh no, I'm being carried along by nature. So the determinist, they want to be, sort of hipper than the libertarian, right? The libertarian's got some sort of magical idea about a magical soul or something. The determinist says, well, I'm materialistic, I'm naturalistic, I'm not into all that. But they say, oh no, that you're not free because there's this lawful causal order. Well, who's you? I mean, it's you still are having an intuition about a disembodied Cartesian soul if you think that the causal order it means determinism. You think determinism means that I'm not making any choices. You're still just as square about all that as a libertarian was. You haven't made any progress at all. Now you think you're just not responsible for anything because he's still thinking you're a disembodied Cartesian soul, as far as I can see, because otherwise you'd realize that you are responsible. The idea again is if we're not these miracles, then we must be causal law slaves. Two sides of the Cartesian coin. Either the Cartesian soul has been let out of the naturalist cage or it's not. Either way, we're something apart. The more interesting version here philosophically is determinism, again, because determinists make this mistake of thinking that determinism follows from naturalism, which it does not. Somebody who believes that determinism obtains, but determinism like solipsism, you can try and act like you think, you're one. It's a strange situation, or like nihilism. It's sort of the punk rocker dilemma, are you going to kill yourself or are you just going to come off it, if my exerting my will to act is illusory, I ought not to have to exert it at all. Or I know my exertions have no causal power. I think it's incoherent to say that your exertions have no causal power, certainly on any kind of empiricist psychology it is, because all you're ever doing is reinforcing your sense of your causal power and its limits. That's what experience sort of is. Refusing to praise or blame deliberating persons on the merits of their actions on metaphysical grounds, right, is just an extension of the more basic claim there's no actions, only events. Humans are not ontologically distinguished. I'm trying to get at this as the last bullet point, right? So wait a minute. There isn't anything special about human beings in the first place. So this sort of life that we live, including pleasures and pains and making lots of choices, it's kind of the datum, I mean, it's not as if somehow it might not be what it is. It is what it is. What we're seeking here is understanding. All right. And the human beings were never, never had any sort of weird relationship to the causal order that in the first place. Why? Because there aren't any immaterial Cartesian souls. What there are bodies, and what we're calling minds is a certain kind of body. What we call a person is a certain kind of body, not determined contingently. I mean, I think there are going to turn out to be these kinds of, let's call them intentional bodies. What are they? They're physical systems that we refer to in terms of their beliefs and desires and hopes and fears, as well as their phenomenal experiences, being positive and negative and being sensitive to their environments. But these are kinds of bodies. This word person and the word mind are both words that refer to certain categories of physical bodies. And notice they don't need to even have any kind of central processing unit at all. Second bullet point, significant for philosophy of mind. Another thing you see people calling themselves naturalists do a lot with mind is they, instead of now the soul having the body as its vehicle, now the brain has the body as its vehicle. The brain is just swapped in for the old Cartesian soul. And now it's the brain that's thinking and feeling and making decisions and living its life. It's incorrect. Persons are bodies. You're a whole body. And when we talk about your beliefs and desires, and when we talk about your sensations and experiences, we're talking about the whole body. We're talking about you. We're not talking about your brain. It's called the mereological fallacy, mistaking the whole for the sum of the parts. Belief, desire, attributions are made to whole persons in physical environments. And again, that's very insightful. If you think about that, you realize a lot of mistakes people make about machines. Look at machine bodies. Last bullet point, if we're allergic, as we should be, to including reference to any non-physical properties in our psychological theories, right? Then we'll reject representational theories of mind that have those properties, property of meaning, property being true or false, non-physical properties. And notice that if you have a representational theory of mind, as I said, that's where you get yourself right in that skeptical dilemma, because now you have the question about the relationship between the mental representation and the external world. And that's just what's driving, all of these mistakes, including these mistakes that these determinists and libertarians are making. So then, just to sum up, the body and the causal order, because the question is, what is our relationship to the rest of the causal order, right? Intentional bodies, complex enough to be called minds. That is, minds aren't something different from intentional bodies. Mind is the word that we use for a certain kind of body. Mind, this is my view. Mind is just identical to a certain kind of body. And it's emergent from quantitative differences. Physical systems emerge as intentional, what we're calling intentional unconsciousness. There isn't anything else to it. Second bullet point, that we have qualitative experiences, that is, these experiences we find good and bad. Okay, we have a body. We have a body that's sensitive to its environment. And that's what it means to say we have experiences that are good and bad. Disembodied things don't have experiences or goodness or badness. Goodness and badness is a function of the body. That's what it is. This goodness and badness is the basis of ethics. When there emerge into the world beings that have experiences that are good or bad, at that point, ethics is real. And that we experience this moral responsibility in the sense of the harm principle. All of this, that we have experiences, the essential experiences, the things that are good or bad is the basis of ethics, and are having a sense of moral responsibility. This is the data. These are the data. These are the facts we're trying to explain. We're not trying to solve a problem, trying to come to an understanding of the condition. Philosophy doesn't necessarily solve problems. We discover ourselves. It is given to us to be that we are responsible. It's nothing more nor less than the awareness of the intentional bodies, which is us, of our own causal role in the past and potential in the future. We can see perfectly well the effects that we've had through our actions in the past, and we can and we have a good sense then, because of that experience, about what things will follow from our actions in the future. This is all about, like, Asian thinking about karma is getting at this kind of thinking about the relationship between one's actions and the condition of the world. The intentional body is not more or less part of the causal order than any other causal factor. If there's a sharp edge of a table that keeps hurting people, that's bad. But the sharp edge of the table isn't a complex enough piece of matter to do anything about it. You, though, are. And the fact that you're a physical body in no way implies you're not responsible for your actions. It just doesn't. Responsibility just is awareness of one's role in the causal order. And you are a body. You are every bit as much a part of the causal order as everything else. Okay. So just then, for a few minutes there, sharing with you my thinking about this. I guess it sort of got onto it, thinking about the chatbot stuff and some of these Cartesian intuitions. And I have thought for a while that the freedom determinism debate was something that's really motivated by bad Cartesian intuition. So I just thought I'll make this recording, put this out there, and see what anybody else has to say about that. So thank you very much for listening, and I appreciate it. And I will see you next time. Bye-bye.